Hey there, engineers and home labbers. Today we're going to do a really simple video. I'm going to show you how I use Proxmox to create different VMs running on Ubuntu. This is going to be a pretty simple and straightforward video. It's just going to show you all of the configurations that I use, how I set stuff up in Proxmox, and then how I initialize and install Ubuntu, and then how some of the very simple things that I do for configuration. With that, let's get started. Inside of Proxmox, the very first thing you're going to do is hit the Create VM button. It's going to ask you for a VM ID. Since this one is not going to be something I'm going to use permanently, I'm going to put it as 599. Give your VM a name. Test Ubuntu VM. And after that, if you hit the advanced button, you will probably want to hit start at boot. This means that if Proxmox reboots and restarts, it will automatically start this server up. And generally speaking, most of the time you probably want that. So then hit next. It's going to ask you for the operating system. The easiest thing you can do is actually to put operating systems, put the ISO images onto your actual storage. And so from there, you can do it by simply, my ISOs are on NVMe 1, and I've got Ubuntu 2204. So let's use that. The type and version, you can leave that alone. Into the system, do check the qemu agent. Otherwise, generally speaking, unless I have a very specific reason to change something, I tend to leave these exactly as they are. With that, we're going to hit next. And here we're going to start doing a couple different things. Since I have SSDs and NVMEs, they tend to benefit from the discard option. Everything down below this line you shouldn't need to do. I don't typically put any caching. And then you'll just choose the drive that you want. And so for this, we'll do NVMe 2. And since I'm not going to save this, I'll just put it at the normal 32 gigabytes of size. But if you wanted to have it as something different, you could set it as 1 terabyte or whatever will work for what you're doing. I do tend to leave the SCSI and virt.io. I found that those tend to be some of the better settings. As far as bandwidth, if you wanted to lock the hard drive so that they can't go above a certain bandwidth, you can do that in here. I don't typically do it because I don't tend to have very many problems with that. Then inside of CPU, and here is where you're probably going to want to pay attention. Inside of type, almost universally, go down and use the host. The host just effectively lets Proxmox pass through all of the flags and features that are available on your specific CPU. And I happen to have a quad CPU, so there are 4 E7 Xeon chips inside of it. And so when I'm doing things, I tend to do something like 4 sockets with 1 core each, which will give me a total of 4 cores. If I'm doing something light, I might only do 2. Most workloads, I might do 4. And if I'm doing something that's going to require a fair bit or be somewhat CPU intensive, I'll probably do something like 8 sockets. I'll do 4 sockets with 2 cores to give me a total of 8. For this though, I'll just give it 1 core on each of the 4 sockets. And then one thing you can do to increase performance, if you have more than 1 actual physical CPU chips. So like I said, I happen to have 4 sockets. Clicking this enable numa button allows them to work together better. And then I always allow the guest operating system to use 1 gigabyte size pages. So I always turn that off. And the rest of these I don't typically need to change or edit. I don't typically edit the CPU units either. But those are the changes that I make in the CPU level. After that, memory is exactly what it sounds like. I do disable ballooning device because I did run into one instance where that caused me some problems. So I will set it at 8 gigs of RAM. For me and my setup, I basically have about 2 gigs of RAM for every core. So if I set something up with 4 cores, I give it 8 gigs of RAM unless I know for a reason that I need to modify this either plus or minus. Certain things like if you're running Pi holes, they really don't take much of any RAM. Whereas there are a handful of instances where even a low CPU core count might require a good bit of RAM. So just have an idea of what you're doing will help a lot, and whether it's CPU intensive or RAM intensive. And if it's kind of just middle of the road, I tend to just stick to, because every one of my cores effectively has 2 gigs of RAM available to it, generally speaking, I'll usually use that setup, and however many cores, I just multiply the RAM gigabytes times 2. After that, over on the network, I can't imagine you're very often going to want to click the no network device. I don't actually use the Proxmox firewall, so I tend to disable it. For my VMs, I will set up the UFW inside of Ubuntu for most of my things, as well as my actual network has a pretty robust firewall on it. I happen to use the Unify UDM Pro, and it has an awful lot of firewall features from the internet. After that, we're going to go ahead and hit next. Last thing, start after created, and then hit finish. And this will, in fact, spin up my new VM. And with that, we're going to open up the console so that we can install Ubuntu. I'll probably end up skipping through a good bit of the installation. But for now, I'm going to try to let you guys see most of the choices that I make before it actually gets to the actual installation. So we're going to choose English. I'm going to continue without updating because for this video, there's no point in me updating to the new installer. I have an English keyboard, so we are all good. I'm using Ubuntu server. I don't particularly need the minimized version. Here's some of the things. So you should set up a static IP address. And so to set up a static IP address, it's kind of silly. It took me a while to actually figure this out. So the subnet is 192.168.3.0/24. This server happens to sit on the VLAN that is at .3. And then I need to give this server an address. And typically, I actually use the Proxmox IDs. That's why most of my servers are in the 100 or 200 range. But we'll give this one an IP address of .3.254. My gateway, 192.168.3.1. That happens to be the actual gateway. My name servers, my Pi holes sit at 192.168.3.13 and 192.168.3.14. And now hit save. So now when my Ubuntu actually spins up, it will have its own static IP address already set. I don't need a proxy. Another thing to do, so I gave this 50 gigabytes. So over on the next page, you'll see now that my LVM group has 48 gigabytes, which is good. But you'll see that inside new to be formatted as ext is only 24 gigabytes, but the hard drive has 50. And there's this free space. This free space is actually the free space that you will have once you actually install Ubuntu. This is the amount of free space that you will have. So you want to actually max it out and use all of it. And this is just the easiest way that I've found to do this. There are other ways to do it, to extend your partitions and stuff like that. It's not all that difficult, but 1 minute spent here will make it so that you don't have to do that in the future. And now you'll see it's a little bit simpler looking. Of effectively, it is going to utilize the all of the space that I gave it. We'll hit done. We will continue. My name is John. My server's name is test Ubuntu VM. Pick a username, John. I'll put in a password. Whoa. What did I do? I'll put in the password that I use for some of my things for testing. And after that, let's hit done. We do want to install OpenSSH. If you happen to use GitHub, I would strongly suggest that you automatically import your GitHub SSH keys. It'll fetch my keys. I hit yes. Since this is basically a simple tutorial and we aren't doing anything in particular, I'm not going to install anything extra. And even if you were to say that, well, Docker used to be on here. Yeah, Docker is on here. I don't like the way that this installs Docker. So even when I'm installing Docker, I don't use this installer for it. Hit done. And now it's going to install. Okay, Ubuntu has finished installing, so let's reboot now. On the very first boot up, it might take a little bit longer than you would normally expect. But test Ubuntu VM login. All we need to do now, log in with name John, put in my password, and we're in. Sudo apt-get install qemu guest agent. I always install this pretty much as soon as I get it, because along with this, it will now tell me the IP address that this is running on inside of Proxmox. Let's go ahead, sudo reboot. That way, qemu guest agent can go ahead and take a look inside of there. With that, I'm actually going to close down this terminal. You'll see right here it says guest agent not running. It should pop up and start running here in a second or two. PowerShell, that's not what I want. So now you'll see that the qemu guest agent is up and running, and it shows the IP 192.168.3.254. And if we try to SSH John at 192.168.3.254, I'm able to get right in. Since I used my SSH key from GitHub, I didn't have to put in any passwords. Since qemu guest agent is running, it will always show me the IP address here inside of Proxmox, which makes it very easy if you're trying to SSH in. And now the only thing left to do is sudo apt-get update. Once that's done, sudo apt-get upgrade to install all of the latest packages. With Ubuntu 22.04, this is a little bit of a newer type of screen. It wasn't in older versions of Ubuntu. Effectively for me, just whatever this has starred and set, I just let it go and say, okay. And with that, this Ubuntu VM is now ready to do whatever you want to do with it. Thank you so much for watching my video today. I hope some people found it helpful. I know that it's pretty simplistic, but for anybody out there who maybe didn't know which settings to use or what some different things did inside of Proxmox, this is how I set mine up, and this is how I do mine. And with that, I've never really had much of any problems. As well, you can take a look at some of my other videos. I talk about using Apache as reverse proxy into several different things, including using Apache as a reverse proxy to get into Proxmox, SSL certificates, things like that. In the future, I have quite a few more videos that I'm planning to make for my channel, so feel free and check back for more. Since my channel is just starting out, any likes, subscribes, or comments really massively help me out. Again, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.